Let's take a look at our roadmap, and up to now we have talked about different things, starting from the basic things, system, information system, what they are, and the key phases of the system development life cycle. And last time out we have talked about stakeholders in very deep fashion, and we have seen the techniques that we can classify stakeholders, and we can put down or list out different stakeholders for our system. And after that, we have talked about different requirement gathering methods, and these requirement gathering methods are requirements should be gathered in a range of methods, and we have talked about the interview, and we have seen the how we can conduct a successful interview to gather detailed information. So today we are headed to this concept is that we will discover, and we will finish what we started on gathering requirements, the different methods. And after that we need to realize that gathering requirement is not an end, but it is a means. So what happens after gathering requirement? We will talk about that, and then we will talk about use cases and user stories. These concepts are very common in system development, system analysis, system design. These are very the heart of system development and system design, I can say. So we will talk about what these concepts are and what is the difference between these two concepts. So at last we will talk about how we can identify use cases and the different techniques that we use to identify use cases. So going in, we will talk about questionnaires. So questionnaires are suited to gathering limited and specific information, so from a large number of stakeholders. So when your stakeholders are large in number, so when you cannot interview each and every stakeholder, you need to carry out questionnaire study. So you distribute questionnaires and you assess their responses, and it is actually useful. And when the people are widely dispersed, so when your people are dispersed in a large geographical area, and so they are large in number, and this collecting or gathering requirements using questionnaires is very important. So it is not suited for gathering detailed information. As we talked about, detailed information can be gathered through the interview because you have much time, because you can ask any type of questions, you can gather detailed information, whereas in questionnaires you only can address what you can write. So you cannot let the respondent further elaborate, or you cannot know different sides of his story. So you cannot gather detailed information. So it is not also well suited to helping you learn about the process, workflows, or techniques. So to learn about if you are gathering requirements for the first time, or you want to learn about the processes of the organization workflows, it is not, you don't have to, or you do not need to conduct a questionnaire method of data gathering, because you cannot see the actual process. Rather, you have the information that is filled by the one, so it is a secondary information. Plus to that, questionnaires have their own drawbacks, which will be discussed later. And open-ended questions encourage discussion and elaboration. So the equivalent to the interview method, where you ask an open-ended question, and then the interviewee or the respondent elaborates on that open-ended question. The equivalent in questionnaires, there are open-ended questions, but usually I can say their response rate is somewhat 2 or 3%, right? So usually people tend to leave out these open-ended questions, which will be very detrimental for in gathering requirements. Okay, and so in interviews you need to address what questions should be for interviews, what questions should be for observations, what questions should be for questionnaires. So you need to determine which type of requirement you need to gather using interviews or using questionnaires. And questionnaires, it must be written effectively with a clear statement or clear questions that won't sound vague when the user or when the respondent reads. So it must be it must flow in a very well manner, and then the respondents of the questions as anticipated. So it should be user friendly, as we have discussed what user friendly is. So in questionnaire, the preparation of a questionnaire is usually very hard. When I say this, suppose you are trying to collect the requirements or data from a group of people which you might which you don't know because they are large in number. So you need to prepare a standard questionnaire which is very clear for all. You see, there has to be a standard questionnaire. So preparing this standard questionnaire would be very, very challenging. But still, the questionnaire has its own advantage. For example, it is tabulated and analyzed quickly, and you gather requirements, especially closed-ended questions, where, for example, let's say there is a feature, there are two types of feature of a use case or an activity that the system performs. So you want to assess which the user favors, which feature the user favors. So you let choose all the users, all the would-be users, I can say, of the system, and you let them choose. And in the questionnaire you can let them choose, and you can analyze this data, and then after the analysis you can decide which is favored by the user. So it is actually useful to these types of gathering requirements. So it is and the other thing I say, the advantage of the questionnaires is that after gathering requirements, you can verify requirements using this questionnaire. So for verification, I think the questionnaire method of gathering requirements is pertinent for the system development process. All right, so let's see a sample questionnaire. This sample questionnaire is for taken from your textbook, and this questionnaire is for a proposed an online commerce or purchase system. So this questionnaire has three parts, namely the part one, which is a fill in the blank, which contains fill in the blank questions. An example: how many phone calls do you receive? How many phone calls are necessary to place an order for a product, and such questions. And the second part contains these closed-ended questions where opinions are rated in a scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. So respondents or users will rate their agreement. So this is an important aspect of a questionnaire. The third part, where we discussed there would be a match non-respondent, and incompletion of a questionnaire is that of the open-ended question. So this assesses some opinions or some ideas from respondents. So this is a sample questionnaire. All right. The third type of gathering information or requirement is review existing reports, which reports, forms, and procedure descriptions. So when we say reports are comprised of different data elements from different sections of the organization. Forms are method of input and output. So if you remember, when we talked about information system, components of an information system, data is an integral and one of the 5 components of an information system. So during your requirements, you need to understand where data can be an input, where data is being outputted. So in forms, you can really witness that, which data is an output, which data is an input, and you can understand with that. So the other one is procedure descriptions. Organizations have their own means of performing business operations. So they put in terms of procedural description. So if you can find these forms, they are absolutely useful in your requirement gathering process. All right, so you can, by reviewing these existing documentations, you can obtain preliminary understanding of processes. That is to say, you can get to introduce what is the business or what is the organization in terms of introducing yourself to the organization. So you will get to know how things are performed, even though it might not tell you in an appropriate level of detail, but you can introduce yourself to the forms, to the concepts, to the terms involved in that specific organization. That's why it's a preliminary. Identify business rules. discrepancies and redundancies. So business rules in an organization, what needs to be performed before what, discrepancies, what is varying, what is different from what, so, and redundancies, which data is redundantly, or which data is duplicate, which is toward duplicate. So paper-based records, most importantly, paper-based records have the drawback of redundant information. So different information is stored in different places redundantly. Okay, so another one is you have to be cautious of outdated material. So there might be a paradigm shift or a change in the way the organization documents. So you need to ask for an up-to-date material. So these forms, these reports, these procedure descriptions can help guide interviews and discussions. So before we have talked about the interview, and before going to an interview, you need to review what existing documentation there is. So as you can get an insight about the business operation, so they can guide interviews. All right, so here is a question for you to ponder over. Think about what existing documentation would you want to see from the student information system, which has been an example throughout this presentation and course. So think about it, and what do you want to see before conducting an interview? All right, let's see an example of a form from your textbook, which I said is the RM, or the Ridgely Mountain Outfitter, which is a fictitious e-commerce or a purchase website. So for this, let's say the existing documentation here document these types of data. So you might want to see this form in order to take it to your proposed or new system, and to get an understanding how the organization carries out different business processes. All right, going in, we have the observe business process. So this is the fourth technique in gathering requirements. This varies from office walkthroughs. When we say office walkthrough, it is simply the wandering here and there and observing business processes by taking a glance, and by taking a sight of the actual business process, and to performing actual tasks. When we say performing actual tasks, participating in documenting, participating in business processes. So this is actually an observation technique. So not necessary to observe all processes at the same level of detail. So we are using different types of methods. So you need to emphasize on, for example, let's say you have interviewed a user or a respondent in that works in the medical record unit of a hospital. So you don't need to pretty much emphasize on the medical record units. Rather, you can observe business processes of different units of the hospital. Okay, and this may make users nervous, so you can use common sense in observation. So there is what we call the Hawthorne effect, or the observer effect, which happens when the respondent, when the individual being observed thinks or feels the effect of being observed and acts in a different manner from the usual. Think about, for example, in a classroom, when you are learning, when you are following a lecture, your actions when the teacher observes you, and when the teacher is not observing you. Think about that, how you can differ. So for this to solve this, the Hawthorne effect, this effect, you can use the participatory observation, which is actually common in social sciences, but you can actually use it in system development. For example, if you want to study if you want to know about how the hospital undergoes different business processes, you might want to act like a patient. You might play the role of a patient and go to the hospital, go to the medical record unit as a patient, and then have your own card, and then go to the next step, like the OPD, and till the discharge, and throughout that you can observe an organic, a natural business process without any bias or without the Hawthorne effect. All right, so let's proceed. And the fifth one is research vendor solutions. So many problems have been solved by other companies which have the same problem as we have. So research for those solutions and then find out and then compare it with your current problem. So the positive contributions of vendor solutions are, the first one is frequently provide new ideas. So there are different evolving technologies and new ideas can emerge from these vendor solutions. And this may be state of the art, which are in state of the art women that followed a very up-to-date programming language, a very up-to-date security. So we might consider buying because they might be state of the art. And the third one is they might be cheaper and less risky. So in building, you risk failure. You fear the failure. In building, you fear the cost, the unprecedented cost. So for that matter, you might want to decide to purchase a solution rather than build it. The danger is you may purchase solution before understanding the problem. So analysts usually think that they have understood the problem fully, and they think, or they very early decide to purchase. So be sure to, when you want to decide to purchase, that you have understood the problem fully. Right, so no one said it was easy. Look at this picture, and from the start to the end, how a requirement can be differently understood by different stakeholders, by different individuals involved in the development of a system. All right, so talking about the five activities of the analysis phase, and we have seen the how we can gather detailed information using different techniques, and now we will proceed to the rest four activities in system analysis, which are defining requirement, prioritizing, developing prototypes, and evaluating requirements with users. All right, so define requirements. So after gathering detailed information, we are using the interview, observation, and other techniques, you need to define the requirements. So requirements are key in system development. So you need to define these requirements. The analyst need to document these requirements so as to define them. So system requirements are functional and non-functional requirements. So there has to be a definition of this functional and non-functional requirements. Defining requirements is not just about writing down facts or figures or what is what. So it is about creating models to record requirements, models like the use case diagram, the activity diagram, and other types of diagrams. Reviewing the models with users. So after creating a model, based on the requirements you gather, you create a model, and then you have to review these models with the users, and then refining and expanding the models to reflect new or updated information. So after reviewing the model, you need to refine it. You need to modify based on the feedbacks that you get from your users. That is all about defining requirements. All right, the next analysis activity is prioritizing requirements. So here, the basic question is which requirements are most crucial for the system. So you need to prioritize based on the essence, based on the sometimes users request additional system functions that are nice to have, but they are not mandatory. So if you have time or resources, you might include them, but this nice to have or desirable features needs to be prioritized as low, right? So why prioritize the functions requested by the user? So users tell you these requirements, and then you need to prioritize, because resources are always limited. In terms of resources, the time, the cost, and the human resource by itself are limited to develop a system that is of a comprehensive, or that comprehends to the needs of the user. So that's why we need to emphasize on those requirements that are very essential. So requirement priorities also help to determine the number, composition, ordering of project iteration. So think about agile approach, which use iterative development. So you can define the number of iterations, composition of iteration, and ordering of project iterations when you prioritize requirements. Okay, so high priority means it is a high priority requirement is performed or built in the early project iteration. So analysts and users have a very ample opportunity to refine those parts of their system. So you have much time if you construct that prioritized requirement, a high priority requirement first, and you have time to refine it and receive feedback from users on that specific requirement. Before going to developing user interface dialogue, I would like to suggest prioritizing requirement as solution for scope creep. Remember scope creep, a phenomenon that happens when you gather requirements that is a widening of the scope of your system. So if scope creep happens, it always happens. So you use the prioritizing of requirements. So then you can overcome the challenge of scope creep. Okay, let's jump into develop user interface dialogue. So communicating with users using different diagrams won't be sufficient for gathering information. So the users need to see and feel the proposed system. So there you communicate one essence of these diagrams is to communicate with the users. So users might sometimes find it difficult to comprehend with the sophistication of these models. For example, the class diagram, the sequence diagram might pose challenges in understanding of the users, right? So you need to create a prototype or a user interface dialogue using prototypes that are an actual system samples where software that is developed and that portrays how the system works for the future. So here you can expose your users to this interface, and you can create user interface dialogues with the user and document requirements. A prototype interface then can serve as a requirement and starting point for developing a portion of the system. So you can continue from there. After you've developed a prototype, you can continue from there and develop the system. All right, the last activity of system analysis. So it is evaluating requirements with users. Ideally, evaluating requirements with users and documenting the requirements are fully integrated. So there is what you call the extreme programming, one of the agile methodologies, and in that the user is one part of the developing team where it guides the verification of requirements, the collection of requirements. The user participates in the development process, in the system development process throughout the SDLC. So that is one example, but it is usually ideal because users generally have other responsibilities besides developing a new system. So this, what you call a user, is someone who works at hospitals, someone who works in the bank, or someone who works in a supermarket, right? So they have what you call their own responsibilities, workers, rather than developing a new system. Okay, so the analysts usually use an iterative process in which, first, they elicit user inputs to model requirements, as we talked about earlier, and then after that they return to the user for additional input or validation. So after constructing the model, they go to the user and show that model, and then the user validates the what needs to be added and what needs to be subtracted. Okay, and after that they will work alone to incorporate the refinements that they have received from the users. Okay, so this will iteratively continue until requirements are complete and accurate enough. So that is why we need evaluating requirements with the users, because they know the exact process, the exact step we need to undergo to perform a requirement. So that our system needs to be complete, needs to be accurate, there must be evaluation of these documented or collected requirements.